Right, so we're going to jump in and kick things off. Welcome to our 5th Zoom call, where we're going to explore the prospects for the creation of a national food service and the experiences of frontline food workers during this pandemic. Tonight, we'll be looking at the problems with distribution and supply of food, highlighted by the COVID crisis, and how they are related to the profit-driven food system. This includes talking more about Rebecca Long-Bailey's exciting proposal for the creation of a national food service. We'll also be talking about the conditions, experiences, actions and proposals of food workers, both in the UK and internationally during the crisis.
Many of us were first hit by the crisis at the supermarket, experiencing the shortages, empty aisles and panic buying that have been commonplace ever since. Last week, we saw reports that more than 3 million people in the UK are going hungry as a result of the crisis. These problems highlight the fact that food systems driven by profits rather than the public good are not up to the task of meeting our basic needs, in times of crisis, but also in normal times.
At the same time, the massive surge of mutual aid groups demonstrates how we all understand the need to come together to support the basic needs of the most vulnerable in our communities in times of crisis. And these efforts can lay the foundations for a nationwide food service for public good, not private profit. Whilst the work of volunteers has been crucial in dealing with the crisis, we shouldn't be left to pick up the pieces where public services have been dismantled by a Tory government.
Another simple fact brought into stark relief by the pandemic is that workers with the lowest pay and worst conditions are the backbone to the very functioning of our society. Retail, warehouse and delivery workers are suddenly deemed essential by an economic system that until a month ago saw them as disposable.
Delivery drivers, warehouse workers and shop assistants are now being forced to put their and their families' health on the line to get us the basic goods we need. These frontline workers are also often working in precarious and insecure conditions, low wage, self-employed or in temporary work without benefits, unions or workplace protections. Migrants are also more likely to work in these industries. In some cases, workers have been laid off without warning or compensation, whilst in others, they have been forced to come into work without protective equipment.
The coronavirus pandemic should force us to think not only about the pay, conditions and rights afforded to core workers, but also about the fairest ways that basic goods can be produced and distributed during the crisis and beyond. We need to start thinking about how production and distribution of food can be used for the public good and not private profit.
So we'll just give you a quick outline of the brilliant speakers that we have on the call tonight. It's a great lineup. First up, we have Steve Jones from the Communication Workers Union, which represents postal workers across the UK. He's on the union's national and postal executives and also chair of its national mental health team. He's going to talk about the CWU's proposal that we should utilise the vast postal network to deliver essential goods and keep a watchful eye on people we serve in the community across the country.
And next up, after Steve, we'll hear from Sarah Jaffa. Sarah is a reporting fellow at the Type Media Centre and the author of Necessary Trouble, Americans in Revolt, and the forthcoming Work Won't Love You Back, both from Bold Type Books. Sarah's going to talk about the strikes and demands being put forth by essential or key workers in the food supply chain, from pickers to grocery store workers to logistics workers. We've been following the really exciting worker actions that are happening that side of the pond, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about this.
And after Sarah, we're going to hear from Callum Cant. Callum is author of Riding for Deliveroo and a PhD student at the University of West London, where he's researching self-organisation and strike action amongst service workers. He'll be talking about how a universal food service could repurpose platforms like Deliveroo for public good and not private profit.
Then next up after Callum, we've got Louise Dolmage, Director of National Food Service Bristol and a national organiser for the campaign. The National Food Service and other organisations like this have been crucial in providing support for thousands of people suffering the impacts of austerity and now the pandemic. Louise is going to tell us a bit about how the service began and what they've been doing during the crisis and how support groups like this can lay the foundations for a publicly run national food service. And you can find out more all about it at nationalfoodservice.uk. I think we're going to put a link in the chat just now. But yeah, it sounds like such class work, Louise and all the team. And then we'll be heading over to India to hear from Vijay Prashad. Vijay is the director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, an inter-movement research institute based in Argentina, Brazil, India, and South Africa. And I think, yeah, we're going to post a link there as well. That's www.thetricontinental.org. It's brilliant. His latest book is Washington Bullets, which will be out next month, with an introduction by Eva Morales. Vijay will talk about science and socialism in Kerala and elsewhere in response to the pandemic. There's a lot to learn from that experience. So yeah, thanks Vijay for sharing your account with us.
And finally, we'll be hearing from Olivia Blake, Labour MP for Sheffield Hallam. Olivia recently tabled a parliamentary motion demanding greater support for mutual aid networks and other organisations working to deal with the emergency. Olivia is going to talk more about the proposal for a creation of a national food service. Really excited to hear about that.
And also shout out to everyone watching on Facebook, or I mean, shout out to everyone. Like, cheers anyone for turning up. Yeah, we should be done with the call in about 90 minutes. But obviously, because we've got so many fantastic speakers this week, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time to take any questions. But we will be posting more information about the National Food Service and how you can get involved with your local group. So yeah, also, please just be patient and bear with us if there are any technical glitches, as there might be. So,
first up, we'll be hearing from Steve Jones from the CWU, telling us about his union's proposals for using the postal network to deliver essentials and more. Steve, thanks so much for joining us, and over to you.
Just trying to get Steve up now. Sorry. This was one of the technical glitches that we mentioned.
Is that good now?
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Cheers. Thanks very much. Over to you, Steve.
Right. Thanks very much, Sam and Nora, for your brilliant introduction. Covered a lot of the things that I wanted to say, so that's great. Perhaps we will get a few questions in if I can finish reasonably quickly. But first of all, anybody who's disappointed that Liam Young can't be with us, unfortunately, he's got a very, very severe toothache, and he had to go into hospital today to have it seen. So he's got some root canal treatment tomorrow, so he can hardly speak. So apologies for those people that were hoping to hear from Liam. First of all, I think if I may, I'd like to pay tribute to all those people that have lost their lives during this crisis. For postal workers and probably countless other key workers. We know what the situation is with bus drivers and NHS and care workers. And that is to grow sadly. So that's been quite a shock for us and those people that know 2 years ago. Who could have imagined that we'd be in the situation that we are in now? Where the absolute horrors that are taking place totally and utterly in this.
Oh, sorry, I think this is again one of these technical difficulties. I think Steve's just cut out then, unfortunately. We're just gonna try for 1 minute, just bear with us, sorry, and we'll see if we can get Steve back. We've got a suggestion from Alex Brent, absolute boy of the movement, who says that maybe if some people could turn off their videos, that helps with the kind of bandwidth or so. I'm saying that like I know anything about any technical stuff, but yeah, bandwidth and stuff. If people can turn off their videos, that would be great. Okay, we might have to try to see if we can get Steve back in a little bit. Could we get? Oh, we've got Steve back! Yay! Hi, Steve.
I hope that wasn't me. I had some problems, and Dan was sorting me out earlier on today. That's Dan Lewis. So thanks to Dan for that. I don't know how much of that you missed, but I was making comparisons to where we thought we would be 72 years after
I think it cut out just after we were like paying tribute to people who've kind of given their lives.
Oh, really? Oh, I was talking to myself for about 2
Thanks, Steve. I'll let you carry on.
So what I was saying was, after having paid tribute, that I was just thinking, after 72 years of the birth of the NHS, that we should find ourselves in such a horrific situation that we are totally and utterly, as a nation and a world, unprepared for what's faced us. And I think that many of us would point the finger at the austerity that has taken place, that being largely a huge contributor anyway to the situation that we're in now. And also the spiralling of food banks that have taken place. And I can't remember in my lifetime seeing the amount of food banks that have risen in the last 10 years, 10 to 15 years. An absolutely horrific situation, which means that those the poorest and the most vulnerable in society are not getting the services that they actually need. And this concept of bringing together food for people across the nation is absolutely vital. And I think also the fact that this horror has happened has put a huge question mark over the way we actually run society and how we actually look at those people that service us on a day-to-day basis. And I often turn around to people and say, who'd have thought it would have been the shop workers, the care workers, the bin workers, the delivery workers, the bus drivers, etc., are the people that are the glue that keep this country together. So I think that through this, out of adversity, we really need to put a spotlight on what we really can do and what we can build for society going forward. And you mentioned Rebecca Long Bailey. I've got an article that she wrote in The Independent on the 23rd of March, when she was the Shadow Biz Secretary. And I quote from that. It's a direct quote from Rebecca, and she said, "We need a comprehensive and coordinated response from the government that I call the National Food Service. This service will coordinate the supermarkets and their supply chains and work with Royal Mail so that everyone receives the essentials who needs them. We really can make sure that no one is left behind in this crisis." That was some 3 odd weeks ago. And on the back of that, my own union that represents postal and telecommunication workers, and when you look at the infrastructure that we've got within Royal Mail, with 50, it's the largest fleet of vehicles in the country, and I think the 3rd largest in Europe, 50,000 vehicles there going begging to be able to supply the nation with its absolute necessities. My own union wrote on the 30th of March to the Chief Executive of Royal Mail, and that was by Dave Wald, our General Secretary now, Deputy General Secretary Terry Pullinger. And what that was, it was a statement, and I quote, it says, "We are publishing this letter and statement below to our members, the government and the media. This will ensure personal protective equipment is in place for all employees as a first and foremost imperative, that we make sure that whilst we're looking at providing an essential service across the nation, that our members are absolutely safe in being able to do that." And there's huge question marks over how management have actually dealt with that over the last few weeks. And we've had a number of stoppages that have taken place as a result of a lack of PPE and distancing in many of our 2,000 odd workplaces. So personal protection has been absolutely vital and number one on our agenda. What it fundamentally goes on to say, and I'm quoting again, that the company should cease acting as a commercial operation and instead operate as a vital national service in line with the government giving postal workers key status. It goes on to say that an unaddressed advertising mail should be immediately suspended. And I'd just like to add that, I mean, I don't know how many of you have had mail put through your door advertising pizza outfits that are no longer open, which seems an absolute waste of time as far as we're concerned, puts our members and the public in danger. So all unaddressed advertising mail should be immediately suspended. The government contracts enabling public testing and the delivery of government information to the public must be prioritised. And then it goes on to say, in conjunction with the government, we should look to maximise the opportunity for Royal Mail's unrivalled infrastructure to be utilised in helping the country deal with the coronavirus crisis. This could include checking on the elderly and the vulnerable to flag up concerns, collecting and delivering food parcels, and likewise with medical prescription equipment. Now, it's a no-brainer, I think, for the people that will be on this call, that to use an organisation that actually visits 30 million households 6 days a week that can't be used to actually deliver essential services is an absolute ridiculous concept not to take hold of and run with. And obviously, of recent times, the government's been talking about using the army to deliver PPE, and I'm sure that the army have got better things to do when the postal workers are actually out delivering door-to-door mail, which people don't actually want. I got hold of my General Secretary. He got hold of me about an hour or so ago because I did ask him whether we'd had any response from the government, and Francis O'Grady, the TUC General Secretary, has been pushing the government to take us up on that offer. But to date, we've had nothing from Royal Mail and nothing for the government to look at a postal service that delivers the length and breadth of this country to deliver the PPE, which we're being told by Hancock that there is plenty of. It's just the logistics of getting it in place and where it needs to be. An absolute disgrace that this government and Royal Mail and our chief executive, who's sat in his penthouse in Switzerland, cannot get off their backsides to talk to the union about delivering a service which would save lives. And there's absolutely no doubt about that. We would have saved lives already. And obviously lots of our postal people, they know their customers, they know the vulnerable customers, particularly in many of our rural locations. They're on first name terms, they know people, and a lot of those people are actually knocking on doors and talking to people and keeping an eye on them. And that could be linked up with local councils, it could be linked up with food banks, it could be linked up with the services that we're talking about today. Absolutely ridiculous. I've actually got no more to add than that. You've got a lot of speakers. I'm looking forward to hearing them, but please, anything that you guys can do to put pressure on anybody to listen to what the trade union is saying. It's obvious the reason why they don't want to talk to us. We're a trade union and it comes against the grain. Well, we've got lives here that need to be saved and we want to do that job. So thank you for your time, and back over to you, Sam and Nora.
Steve, thank you so much. That was brilliant. Yeah, and like you've been saying, obviously this is a difficult time for postal workers right across the country. And I'm sure I speak for everyone on this call, and I just say a huge thank you to you and all of your colleagues. Full solidarity, appreciation and respect in these challenging times for your members. So yeah, thanks so much, Steve. So yeah, now on to our next speaker now, Labour reporter and author, Sarah Jaffa, who is joining us today, hopefully, from Philadelphia. She also hosts the excellent Belaboured podcast from Dissent magazine, which you can find at soundcloud.com/belaboured-podcast. That's belaboured without the U in the American spelling. Maybe we can post that in the chat as well, hopefully. Yes, you can find that on SoundCloud or any other kind of decent podcast app. And she's going to be telling us about how workers across the food supply chain on her side of the Atlantic are organising and fighting back. So Sarah, yeah, can't wait to hear from you. Are you there?
I'm unmuted. Hello, can you hear me?
Amazing, yeah.
How do I sound?
You sound amazing.
Wonderful. Hello. Thank you all for having my American self on your call. Thanks, Steve. Also, I wanted to just say, somebody had just mentioned in the chat that, yes, they're trying to let the postal service over here collapse so that they can privatize it. So it's always good to hear from postal workers. So yes, I am a labor journalist. I write about workers. Most of what I'm going to say is going to be US centric in terms of actions and the reporting I've been doing since I have been back here stuck in my house in the US for a little while. But most of what I'm talking about is going to be similar in the UK in terms of sort of the shape and makeup of these workforces and the solutions and suggestions that people are making. So I'm kind of just going to run down a list of types of workers and talk about some of the things that I'm hearing from people, starting with the farm workers. So I spoke the other day with a tomato picker from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which is an organization of farm workers in Florida. They have a list of demands that includes protective equipment. They're calling for a field hospital to be set up near the planting, space for social distancing. Importantly, a lot of these folks live in really cramped temporary housing, ride cramped buses to work. It's like literally a perfect storm for spreading the virus. And they want to be included in government funding, since many of them are migrants. Some of them are on guest worker programs, others are undocumented. And the other thing that we're seeing coming from farm workers, and this is probably true, I would guess, in the UK as well, is because most restaurants are closed, the food chain is suffering the same way that a lot of other supply systems are suffering, which is that things that would normally go directly to restaurants are rotting in the fields, milk is being dumped, things like that, because it's not that easy to actually like rejigger the supply chain so that things end up in grocery stores. So you get sort of shortages in grocery stores while things are in other places not being sold. Food processing workers are another place that is a perfect storm for spreading the virus. There's a hotspot in South Dakota, which is one of the least densely populated states in the US, but that the Smithfield Foods pork processing plant in South Dakota has now been closed because 293 people there have the virus. That is 293 out of the 730 people in the entire state, and 3,700 people work at that plant. So that's just one example of how quickly this can spread and how quickly that can shut down an entire one segment of a supply chain. So again, the food processing workers have lack of protective equipment, workers are getting sick. There is, a problem in terms of healthcare. You all have probably sort of the same testing problem that we have, which is that you can't get tested unless you are in a hospital. So for workers who want to be able to call out sick from some of these places, they're being required to get proof that they have tested positive for COVID-19 in order to be allowed to stay home. When you can't actually get tested, or when it takes 7 to 9 days in some cases to get your test results back, what we're seeing is people making the choice between, well, we know how this works at any time, right? But it works even more so right now when we have a terribly infectious virus. Let's see, logistics workers. You have probably all heard about the Amazon workers going on strike at several of the warehouses in the US and elsewhere. Also, some of them getting fired for their troubles. Today, we also found out that 2 of the tech workers at Amazon who had expressed solidarity with the warehouse workers have also been fired. So it's really great out there. So the Amazon workers are calling for, again, protective equipment, space to socially distance. One of the important things they're calling for there is cutting down on delivery of non-essential items so that warehouses are less packed with people tripping over each other and spreading the virus. The company needs to enforce it. It's not enough to just tell people, not to impulse buy things because you're bored and you're getting advertised, cute shoes on Instagram or whatever. But the company is selectively doing that. Now, today, there was a report that it will enforce such essential buying only in Italy and France. But what that means for the workers, again, who are going on strike and getting fired for it in the US, we don't really know. Let me see, food prep and service workers. I've talked to a bunch of people who work in different places. So we have fast food workers going on strike. We've got other kinds of restaurant workers going on strike. And what they've been told is if they want to wear protective equipment, it, quote, makes customers nervous. So if they wear a mask, apparently that will make customers nervous. I spoke to Bertha Bradley, who's a fast food worker from North Carolina, who told me that a customer brought them masks and their boss still told them they weren't allowed to wear them. So she was on strike when we talked. So some of those strikes have, again, gotten results, gotten workers allowed to wear protective equipment. And I was just reading a story this morning of workers who took over a McDonald's in Marseille to use it to produce and deliver food for the community. So I love that story, maybe relevant to the production of a national food service. Delivery workers, which I'm sure Callum will address in much more depth than I will, so I'm just going to touch on it quickly, because we did have Instacart workers go on strike and also win access to protective equipment that the company would provide. There was also a kind of horrifying story about something called tip baiting for Instacart, which is a service, I don't know if it's also available in the UK, where somebody will go do your grocery shopping for you and deliver it to your door. And people would put really high tips, like a $50 tip on the thing, so that when workers open the app, they could see like, oh, I'm going to get a big tip. And then Instacart allows people who use it to change the tip like up to a day or two afterwards. So people would put a $55 tip in the thing and then change it to nothing or very little instead after the worker's already done the work. So I just want to note for the record that anybody who does that is going straight to hell. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is grocery store workers, because their grocery stores are one of the more densely unionized parts of the US retail sector, which is not to say much, but it's something. And workers who are organized with the United Food and Commercial Workers have won in several cases hazard pay, expanded sick protections, social distancing in stores, protective equipment, breaks for hand washing, things like that. Some hazard pay in other places like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. The city, or the county of Los Angeles rather, has passed an order along grocery workers' demands following many of these safety protocols. And one of the things that's been useful is that the workers are seeing all of this successfully. Yes, McDonald's is still open in the US. So the workers who are successfully winning all these things now are saying to me, well, you know, Kroger, this big grocery store chain, is doing great. They're raking in profits right now, right? Because everybody's buying more groceries rather than going to restaurants. So the company can easily afford to put all of these things that we've just won here in our next contract. So in terms of talking about worker leverage right now, right? Normally in times of massive unemployment, like the 16 point something million people who've applied for unemployment benefits as of last week, and we will get the updated numbers tomorrow, so I'm prepared to be depressed again tomorrow. That normally means that, you know, it's really hard for workers who go on strike or who make any demands to win those. But right now, the jobs, and most of these jobs that I've listed here, most of these jobs that we're talking about now is essential work, are crappy jobs, right? They're not paid well. The US is, Trump is basically saying he wants to cut farm workers' wages further to reduce pressure on their bosses. So it's quite hard in this moment when we've got at least some improvement on the unemployment benefits, when people are theoretically getting these $1,200 checks, although nobody has gotten any yet, to convince people to go take a job picking tomatoes or, you know, selling groceries for minimum wage and the chance of getting coronavirus of your very own. So in this moment, we're actually seeing increased worker leverage even at a time of high unemployment, which is great. And it's also, you know, public opinion is probably going to be more on the side of workers who are saying, we don't want to work sick. We don't want to give you coronavirus with your groceries. And then, of course, my favorite tool, which is the sick out. If you want to go on strike, for instance, for teachers in New York City, this is a little bit outside food production, but not much. If you want to get the schools closed down, the teachers organized a mass sick out. And again, what are you going to do? Tell people that they're not sick? Well, again. So I am going to let you go because I know we're tight on time on this call, and I'll just wrap up there and try to answer some of these questions in the comments.
And we've probably got time for like a couple of questions.
Well, I was just going to say, I'll just do them in the chat.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. Okay, cool.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. It was great to hear from Sarah there, and the workers that are taking action. Amazing, amazing initiatives to protect their interests. Can you, can you say a bit about where this strike wave has come from? Has there been an upsurge in industrial action in these sectors in recent years, or has it just sprung up?
So we've seen in some of these places some increased action. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers, for instance, some of these farm worker groups have been organizing for years and have won some important gains. And so now they're building on that. The grocery stores who are already unionized already had some power in collective bargaining. And then in other places, we're seeing, there was a little bit of organizing going on in places like Amazon warehouses. And we're seeing things like that, like massively increase, because again, people who were previously sort of unwilling to risk their job are a little bit more willing to risk their job if the alternative is getting really sick. So the willingness of workers to take action in this moment seems to be going up. And of course, the more you hear about strikes, the more people are willing to go on strike. The whole thing is kind of contagious like that.
Amazing. Yeah, I think we're gonna move on. Are you gonna still keep answering questions in the chat, Sarah? Yes, amazing. Yeah, we're gonna move on as well. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. That was brilliant. Yeah, and just after that, we just wanted to say it'd be really good to hear some of your suggestions and any other questions you have for Sarah in the chat. But yeah, we're looking for other suggestions for local mutual aid groups or worker-led campaigns and any other related organising that people can get involved with. So yeah, please do post your suggestions in the chat and we'll try and share them with everyone at the end of the meeting. Also, yeah, great that we've got like 330 people on the call. That's awesome. So yeah, right now we're going to go and hear from Callum Cant, author of Riding for Deliveroo. If Callum's there, yeah, who is going to tell us about how a universal food service could repurpose platforms like Deliveroo for public good. So yeah, Callum, how's it going? How are we going to do it?
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, good, good.
Yeah, good. I'm all right. It's a pleasure to be sharing an isolated evening with you all. So yeah, thanks to Steve and Sarah for leading off there. It's really exciting, I think, to hear about the CWU's plans. They're a real example of what trade unions should be doing at the moment. And I think, if any of us can support them, it'd be fantastic to do so. I kind of want to start by discussing some more general principles, right? So I think one of the major features of capitalism as a mode of production is that it basically forces us to do work that's profitable rather than work that is useful, right? That's because under this economic system, bosses think more about the profit they can make from the sale of a commodity than they do about how useful a commodity is. So for instance, if you're producing weapons, you're not thinking about, will these be used in the Yemen to perpetuate, crimes against humanity? You're thinking, oh, will there be a lot of money made off them? And I mean, David Graeber's talked about this. Lots of people have kind of bullshit jobs, right? They have jobs that don't really understand what they contribute, but they just make somebody money. So we keep on doing them. I think one of the fascinating things about this crisis, about the pandemic, is because it's pushing us to make this very strong distinction between what is actually socially useful production and what is production that's just for profit. Like what is essential and what is non-essential, not viewed from the point of view of the economy or the people who profit off the economy, but viewed from the point of view of how do me and you carry on living? How do we all continue supporting ourselves? So we're all trying to figure out who has to do their job in order to reproduce us all in the short term. And that definitely isn't the same thing as the work we have to do to keep capitalism going, or the work that produces the most money for our bosses. So I think key workers primarily, we're all discovering, are these, workers who do socially useful jobs who often aren't remunerated in kind. People who do incredibly difficult work, incredibly strenuous work, are often not paid anything like what they should be for the work and are exploited to the hilt. But those key workers aren't the only people who are really suffering during this crisis. And I'd argue that the self-employed, largely, you can look at Deliveroo, that's what I'm going to talk about mostly here, but you can also look at the construction industry. Lots of self-employed workers don't have the choice to not go into work, right? Because what we've actually seen the government do is, advise that non-essential business isn't conducted, but actually, there's very little enforcement of you can't turn up if you're not doing something that is socially useful. So for instance, Deliveroo workers, well, there's no furlough scheme, right? If you don't turn up for work, you're just not getting paid, right? There's no scheme that you get 80% of your wages. So those workers, there's no government scheme that covers their wages. So those workers are really having a difficult time now. So Deliveroo isn't self-identifying the work that these delivery workers are doing as inessential and shutting it down, basically because they haven't been forced to. What they do have, they currently have these schemes to provide partial PPE, so protective equipment, and also some funding to workers. but they're only providing that to workers who have qualified by doing a certain number of deliveries. So you have to work for a period without a mask in order to earn yourself the capacity to then get a mask that you can wear whilst you're working. It's this kind of bizarre mind bender where you basically don't have a right to PPE. You have to prove to the company that you deserve it. So this is obviously dangerous for those workers involved. It's dangerous for people who are getting food delivered to them. But there are also some, I think, much wider problems with the sector, which are basically that at the moment, these workers, they don't have a guaranteed minimum wage. So if you're turning up and trying to do deliveries from a restaurant kitchen, but that restaurant kitchen is really over busy and you just can't get the orders because they're not coming out the kitchen, you don't make any money in the time that you're sat there. And from what I'm hearing from workers on the front line is that's increasingly common because many big chains have kind of like shut down their kitchens. All of the demand is going into a smaller and smaller number of restaurants, which basically means there's huge queues, huge waits everywhere that is open. Which really means that the platforms are barely functional, workers are making really low wages, and they're also clustered together in more dangerous environments. And if people want to keep up to date with kind of what's going on, the forefront of that struggle, then I'd encourage them to take a look at the IWGB Couriers and Logistics branch, Twitter and stuff to kind of see what they're demanding and how they're pressing the company. But I also want to move on now to just thinking a bit more about this idea of like a national food service, right? Because I worked for Deliveroo for, I think like 8 months. It's what the book is about. And basically, from my time on that job, I know that it isn't entirely unessential. Despite the company marketing the business as you deliver sushi to highly paid professionals, a lot of the time what you're doing is you're delivering the cheapest item on the menu to, say, someone who's got caring responsibilities and doesn't have the ability to cook, or someone who just doesn't have any food in the kitchen. I talked to one tech worker once who said that they ordered Deliveroo, and whenever they did, it was the choice between cornflakes for dinner and pizza. Right, and that's very much a thing. Like this is often care work for people who are really struggling to get by, either because they're finding it difficult to access, they haven't been out shopping or whatever. So there's a core to this work, which is fundamentally it's about looking after each other, right? And I think that what we're interested in as socialists is finding those parts of the work we do under capitalism which are already useful and kind of expanding those and really developing those, because many people hate their jobs because they're pointless and bullshit, and they're quite right to do so. But some people do really valuable work, but in very bad circumstances. So for instance, a nurse right now, the NHS is highly underfunded. People might be struggling with a lack of PPE. They've been systematically undervalued by a Conservative government for years. And yet, we don't want to get rid of nursing. We want to find what's useful in that and kind of expand it. So I think that one of the ideas that I propose is this idea that basically, the delivery of food to people who need help providing themselves with food is obviously really socially useful. So for instance, Meals on Wheels has often provided this service. And now what's happened to Meals on Wheels during austerity? It's been cut to bits, right? So vulnerable people, elderly people can't get access to that service in the same way they used to do. However, we can quite easily imagine with relatively little manipulation of the kind of technologies that Deliveroo uses, you could have these people having a on-demand delivery service for certain kinds of food. We could equally expand it to, if we have a holistic view of healthcare, if we're thinking about, what's the struggle that a lot of people, if you're struggling with mental health problems, certainly when I've had depression, it's been really hard sometimes just to get out of bed and go to the shops, right? If you have the capacity on prescription to order food to your door, that could potentially massively increase people's well-being. Now, how would we provide that? There's all sorts of potential material organisations of that. But I really like the idea of setting up kind of communal canteens. So basically, Deliveroo at the moment have these dark kitchens. You might see them on like industrial estates around the place. Every 1 or 2 miles, particularly in big cities like London, you'll have this kind of kitchen that just does deliveries. They're called dark kitchens because you can't go there and sit down for a restaurant. All it does is it does deliveries. Now these like little sites spread across the city operate as like mini warehouses, right? Now I think one of the inspiring ideas is what if we took those back and we had kind of community canteens set up in our neighborhoods, and we use those not only to, do food provision in person, but also to set up these kind of delivery networks. We've got to think about, turning all of these jobs that people do at the moment, which just make their bosses richer and richer, instead thinking about a socially useful core. I think in the kind of a bigger picture terms, this is a question about the future of care, right? Because we know from the experience or from the lessons of the feminist movement that care isn't best delivered in the isolation of the home by overworked housewives, right? but it's also not best provided by profit-making businesses. You know, you only have to look at the working conditions in fast food work, the way Sarah was talking about, to know that that's not the best way to do care. Instead, it should be kind of for us and by us. And I think that for me, this idea of a collective kitchen, a collective canteen with the delivery option is one of the ideas that, you know, you can go back to Alexandra Kollontai, who was a member of the Bolshevik Central Committee during the Russian Revolution in 1917. That was one of the ideas she was advocating a century ago. And we need to recover and expand those ideas in our new context in order to think about, you know, radically, how can socialism be profoundly better for us on a daily basis, not on kind of like an abstract level, but concretely, what could you have under socialism that you can't have today? Autonomy have done some great research on this, putting this, I think, in a more specific context, talking about, you know, an essentials delivery service as part of their coronavirus response research. But I, for one, you know, think that we need to kind of zoom out, and the CWU proposals are fantastic at doing this. And all of us need to look at our work and say, actually, what do I want to do to deal with the climate crisis? What do I want to do to deal with coronavirus? What do I want to do to care for the people around me and help my community? And how can I organize in the workplace with my co-workers against the interests of my bosses, you know, not necessarily just to make them more money, but what can I do that can be socially positive? And for me, that's, you know, one of the exciting visions we're getting out of this crisis, albeit there are many horrible things that we all have to deal with at the moment. But that is one of the visions that I'm really clinging to.
Amazing. Thank you, Callum. Really inspiring, insightful observations there. And now that we've all got the time, definitely read Callum's book, Riding for Deliveroo, as we've got quite a big reading list coming up here. So before we move to our next speaker, I just wanted to take this opportunity to plug the TWT Supporters Network. The coronavirus crisis poses an existential threat to independent grassroots organizations like TWT. In this time of global crisis and uncertainty, collective political education on the left is more important than ever. Yet we are running on a shoestring budget, and we know that many people are in tough financial situations, especially right now, and we'll always ensure that content like this call can be available for free of charge to everyone. However, if you are someone who is secure financially and you believe that the work that TWT do is important, please consider supporting TWT to help scale up and sustain this work. You can sign up at theworldtransformed.org/support. That is theworldtransformed.org/support. We'll post that in the chat as well. Yeah, thank you. I have to do the worst bit.
And then, next up, we've got Louise Dolmage, Director of National Food Service Bristol and National Organiser for the campaign. While we're talking about a national food service tonight, Louise and her colleagues are sowing the seeds on the ground. So, yeah, Louise, are you there? And can you tell us what has been happening?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear her.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can't see you, though.
Oh, you should be able to see me.
Oh,
There
yes.
we go.
You see me?
Cheers, Louise.
Hello, cool. Well, thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, I'm going to go through a little bit of discussion about what the campaign is and what we've been up to. So, the National Food Service is a campaign to tackle food insecurity through collective action. We are a network of social eating and food justice projects who collaborate and share resources to strengthen one another. We're an action-focused organisation, so we're not campaigning for the state to create a national food service one day. We're building one now, and we're proving that it's possible. Food is a right. All but one of the party manifestos at the last election recognised this, and I'm sure you can guess which one was the odd one out. Food, like water, heat and housing, is a right that no one should have to go without. There is enough food for everyone. The problem is the broken way we fail to distribute it. This has been a case for a long time, but it's especially true during the crisis. We've heard from the bin collectors in Bristol that they're seeing more food waste now than ever. People are stockpiling and then they're throwing it away, while other people have nothing at all. Outside of this crisis, we're building the NFS by creating opportunities to cook and eat together. Not only is this healthier, but cooking en masse is more sustainable and more efficient. So cooking for one person and throwing half away is ridiculous. Cooking for 40 uses way fewer resources and hugely reduces the risk of waste. Community space is just as important. We live in increasingly isolating cities. We need spaces we can interact with and projects we can become a part of. So not that privately owned public space that's like unbreakable and unmovable, but places where we can change them if we want to, and we can make them into somewhere we feel comfortable. We're losing these community spaces. Rents are rising and they can't meet them. More will be lost thanks to the crisis because they can't pay their bills. This is why we asked in our demands, which are the demands that became the basis for Olivia Blake's early day motion, that the government freeze the rent on community spaces. If we lose these spaces now, many will never come back. After the crisis, we will need more than ever easy, accessible, and affordable ways to be able to come together again. We will be relegating thousands to loneliness if we don't protect these spaces now. Creating and protecting community space is a huge part of what we do. This is as much about space as it is about food. We're not just feeding people, we're building communities. Even when we can't come together, we're still building co-created projects which are rooted in their local area. This is not a charity, this is not a food bank, this is solidarity. National Food Service branches are projects you can interact with and that you can change into being what you need them to be. This kind of community-led and co-created system is the core of our network. We are a different kind of public service to the top-down paternalistic models we've seen before. We are also not a private market-based service of competing charities and outsourcing firms. We are the welfare road less trodden, the community paradigm for provision, which is characterized by user ownership that can be locally specific, but nationally accessible. A national food service is not impossible, it's happening. Solving hunger is not difficult, it's not even expensive. Our market-driven food system is what's forcing people to go without. Just like how the NHS began, this won't be from the top down. We're building successful examples of the National Food Service in action so that it becomes easy for the state to support it and eventually ridiculous for them not to. So we've been active since about 2017. We've been included in the vision from Labour for a Green New Deal. We're working with Green New Deal UK, collaborating on projects with Acorn and working with local councils on our COVID response. Food Hall, the project in Sheffield, was visited by the Shadow Cabinet. And as you know, we've been picked up by a number of MPs, including Olivia, who put forward our demands as her early day motion, and Rebecca Long-Bailey, who we spoke to about our campaign in January and who recently suggested her own version, working off the basis of the Postal Service, as we heard about. We love Rebecca's enthusiasm and it's a great idea, but we'd love it even more if she supported and strengthened the National Food Service as it exists. There's no need to talk about how this might be done. It's being done, and we need your support. If the CW would like to join our network and start a National Food Service branch, that would be brilliant. We'll show you how to do it based on what we've learned from our already successful NFS projects. Cool. So since the COVID crisis has struck, obviously we've shifted away from social eating and we're using our existing community networks to move towards emergency food delivery. So the NFS network has really come into its own during this crisis. It's been great to see the branches supporting one another up and down the country. I'm going to give you a bit about what's happening at a local level so you can see the bigger picture. And hopefully Karis is going to show you a few images to go alongside this. And we practiced it earlier, so it should be okay. Cool. So Sheffield was the first project to get off the ground with the COVID response. This is because they're already a successful social eating project called the Food Hall Project. Food Hall is the birthplace of NFS, and many of the ideas we promote are based on what we've learned from this community. They first changed from social eating to food hole in the wall. Then, as the lockdown progressed, they moved to a phone order system. This phone line system is based on an original one used by the Falmouth NFS branch. Thanks to the NFS network, we shared this idea and have now been able to build similar systems at our other projects. Like Food Hall in Sheffield, NFS London are now working in collaboration with council efforts. Councils in a lot of areas are collaborating with mutual aid and community organisations to get people fed. This is, I think, a great example of our theory of change in action. We've made these services and now the state are coming to work with us. As well as technical support, the network has been an invaluable place for emotional support. We regularly check in with our other branches to ask how we're doing and reassure one another that this is hard, but it's happening. Bristol is where I'm based, so it's the project I know best. We're giving out 650 meals per week and growing all the time. This has been done on a very limited budget. We're only just covering costs, and it's a truly mammoth task from myself, Pete, and my team, who are all volunteers. We're connected to the ecosystem of local community organising in Bristol. We share food amongst ourselves to reduce the cost and reduce waste. We also refer from our phone line to multiple organisations, including Acorn Bristol. We're using the kitchen, usually used by a local super supper club, and are working with them to cook meals. This is a really community-rooted project. Our phone line, again based on the same system as Falmouth and Sheffield, is more than just an order line, it's a lifeline. Our volunteers might sit on the line with some people for an hour or more, making sure they're okay. We can't eat together right now, but we can still care for one another. I'm going to end by sharing a lovely story that I got from Pete today. So Pete is a director of NFS Bristol, and he's been working day and night to help pull this off. He's an incredibly skilled community organizer. Today, he took a delivery to someone, knocked on the door, set it down, stepped back as per good social distancing protocol. When the person came out, they were so grateful. They'd only just moved, they knew no one in the area, they hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 weeks. And while they're talking at the door, her neighbor comes out. And the neighbor already knows Pete because he's been door knocking around there before with Acorn. So he introduces the two neighbors, and now they know each other and they can talk over the gate. And then a third neighbor comes out and she's asking Pete, oh, hey, what are you doing now? And he says, well, he's delivering meals for the National Food Service, which she thinks is great. And now she's going to volunteer with us. So that's one delivery, but that's 3 people that now know each other and can talk to each other and support each other during this crisis. And that's a woman who's got food and she knows who she can call to get more. And we've got another valuable volunteer out of the whole interaction. So even in this challenging time, we can still build community. And it's the same tactics as always. Talk to people, find out what they need and help them to make it happen. Yes, it's time for a National Food Service and it's already being done. Thank you.
Quality, Louise. Thanks so much. We've got time for maybe like a couple of questions potentially. So yeah, if anyone wants to post it in the chat right now, please do. We've just got one, which is, would you like to see the National Food Service incorporated into state provision? Like, is that the ideal? And do you think it's possible to kind of scale up without it becoming embedded in local or central government structures?
Yeah, so the community-led nature of the model and it being reliant on volunteers does make it very easy to scale, but the vision is not to always have it reliant on volunteers. I'd love to be paid. I'm not ashamed to say that. I'd love to make a living wage from this. And I think the vision is that eventually we can all do that. We're experimenting with different models for payment in different branches. In Bristol, we're looking to trial a membership model, a bit more like a union, but you know, it's early days with that. Yeah, I think our value is that we will exist, I think, for as long as people want us to be there. Because we're not a charity, we're built by the people in that community. And I think people are more likely to invest permanently in their own community than in someone else's. So I think that speaks to our longevity. I mean, we've all seen the unfortunate, you know, you get a change in government, they can destroy a public service. We saw this happen before when we had the national kitchens. The government deliberately closed them because they were thought to be hotbeds of communist thought. Make of that what you will. So that is a real worry. What I see personally is that we'll end up with a kind of combination model, a bit like in South America. I think in Brazil, their public eating spaces, some of them take on state support, some of them refuse state support, and it's kind of a combination effort in that way.
Cool, thank you for that, Louise. That was really clear and insightful. That's all we've got time for questions. We're going to have to move on to the next speaker. But if anyone's got anything else to ask Louise, just post it in the chat and then we can take it from there. So thanks for joining us this evening, Louise. It's great to hear how your organisation is giving an example for the expansion of the collective good that we're talking about tonight. And it will be up to all of us to join you in building what comes next. And speaking of examples for nurturing and expanding the collective good, our next guest is Vijay Prashad, Director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, who will tell us about the response to the coronavirus pandemic in India's communist-run Kerala province, amongst a few other examples. Vijay, the UK's botched response certainly shows that we have a lot to learn from other parts of the world. So help us out. Are you there?
Yes, okay.
Hurrah.
Fine.
Take it away.
Good evening. Well, from this hotbed of communist thought, I have some ideas for you. The first thing I'd like to say is that something happened yesterday which teaches us about the straight line struggle between the difference between a capitalist country, an imperialist country, and a socialist country, however much it's struggling. Yesterday, the government of Vietnam delivered 450,000 units of protective clothing to the United States. Now, you might want to remember that the United States dropped 2.5 million tons of ammunition on Vietnam. 260 million cluster bombs were dropped on Vietnam. And yet the Vietnamese people, in living memory of that horrendous war, have sent the United States protective clothing. This tells you the difference between an imperialist society and a socialist society. I'm going to share with you the example of Kerala, a state in southwestern India. It's a state with 35 million people. It's a part of India with a GDP of about $140 billion. It's quite a big state. It's an important, if it was a country in Europe, you'd consider it one of the bigger countries, but it's merely a state in very large India. I want to first say to you that the state has a vibrant communist movement. Currently, the government is a communist government. But what this has meant is that for the last 7 decades, public action has been greatly supported by the state. In other words, there are robust trade unions, there are robust women's organizations, and I just want to introduce you to one organization, a cooperative. Kerala is filled with cooperatives of all kinds. I said that the population is 35 million. I should say that the largest of the cooperatives is named Kudumbushri. It's an all-women's cooperative, and it has a membership of 3.5 million people. 3.5 million women are organized into Kudumbushri, a cooperative. They produce cooperatively. In other words, Kerala's socialism isn't just about distribution, fixing the distribution of services and goods. It's about production. The production of goods through cooperatives, decommodification of as much of the economy as possible. Because of this history of having a communist state and having public action be so fundamentally supported, Kerala's response to COVID-19 has been quite special. And I just want to list a few things for you. The most important thing was the health minister, K.K. Shalja teacher. You see, she in January was well aware when she saw that something was happening in Wuhan. She is a science-based health minister, unlike health ministers in most of the Western world who seem to have some sort of hallucination about science. She is very science-based. She saw the reports from Wuhan and she said, we have students from Kerala in Wuhan. They immediately created a task force on the 5th of January. Now, you got to remember, the WHO was informed by the government of China on the 31st of December. Government of China informed the US Center for Disease Control on the 31st of December. On the 5th of January, Kerala had already created a task force. United States created a task force in March, friends. That's the advanced industrial state in the world. The imperialist leader was sitting on their hands. Boris Johnson thought this was a joke. Shalja teacher, whose name you've never heard, set up a working group already in the 5th of January. So they already began to mobilize state resources and prepare. And they contacted all the mass organizations, trade unions, cooperatives, women's organizations, said, get going, we need you. So the trade unions in bus stands set up washing places to wash hands when you got off the bus and so on. Massive public action, not driven by the state. The communism of Kerala is not all state initiative. It's also public action. It's very important. Everything in a communist society, just as in China, need not be done by the state. In China, in fact, neighborhood committees kicked in across Wuhan. I've just written a 3-part series on how China broke the chain of infection. Neighborhood committees played an enormous role. Even in China, you have a vision of China as being a top-down authoritarian society. You're just drinking the garbage from the Daily Mail and the Guardian, the most execrable newspaper, pretends to be liberal, doesn't know how to cover the rest of the world. They have a vision of China totally top-down. They don't know anything about neighborhood committees, cooperatives, how people volunteer. Immense tradition of volunteerism in these socialist societies. Well, the chief minister, the health minister began to do daily press briefings, science-based press briefings. They taught people not about flattening the curve, which I can go on about that at length. They said the slogan is break the chain. They didn't say social distancing. This is a socialist society. They said physical distancing, social solidarity. It's a much better slogan than social distancing. Physical distancing, for sure. Wear masks, don't spit in each other's faces, as we saw in the United States, where Asian people were being discriminated against because the United States decided this in a racist way to say China is responsible. No, physical distance, but social solidarity. We need to take care of each other. This was the slogan from the government. One, break the chain of infection. Second, physical distance, not social distance, but social solidarity imperative. This public action by the state was by organizations and society very important. I gave you the one example of trade unions coming out there and building sinks to wash hands at bus stations and so on. That was happening over there. Kudumbushri, this very large cooperative, started making masks. Another trade union, which is a construction workers union, started to build temporary relief centers. And then the chief minister said something very important. You see, in a capitalist society, the best that the capitalist sclerotic brain can think of is small cash disbursements to each individual who is facing difficulty. Some kind of universal basic income scheme, or just a check written to people. Let's send everybody in the UK so many pounds. This is how a capitalist relief works. Give people money. No, not in Kerala. Kerala, yes, we'll underwrite pensions, we'll help you with this, that, that's fine. In fact, $260 million worth of Indian rupees was set aside to provide income support to people. But that's not the point, really. That's not relief. The real relief was immediately 43 community kitchens were set up across the state. In every district, community kitchens were set up. Why is this important? You see, when you give an individual or a household cash, they go to the market and they start to bid up the prices of food. This creates food inflation. It's a big error for a socialist to believe everything should be commodified. You must try to decommodify as many parts of social life as possible. And in Indian communism, this is a fundamental aspect of our work. We don't want everything to be commodified. People they're suffering, give them money. No, people are suffering. How do we enhance people's social existence without the existence of money? So let's produce food kitchens for people to come, and also we can deliver food to people. Apps were created for food delivery from cooperatives, and also food delivery which is uncooked. So the government decided they'll create a ration system. So much rice, so much vegetables. So you can get rations delivered to your homes. Who will deliver these rations? Not necessarily government employees, but mass organizations of the trade unions, student movement, youth movement, etc. You see, when you live in a capitalist society which has been under austerity and privatization for decades, the institutions of society have been destroyed. Trade unions have been really put under immense pressure to defend the rights of workers. They're unable to be altogether creative with building society. They are defending against an enormous attack for decades and decades and decades. When you look at places like Kerala, where the trade unions have not faced this kind of attack, they've been able to defend the rights of workers, but also enter into society to take a cultural position vis-a-vis how people organize their lives. This is very important. We don't want to live lives as atomized individuals. Nobody wants to be an individual. Robinson Crusoe sitting on an island. By the way, he was not much of an individual. He had somebody who was working for him there. But leave that aside. That's an old imperialist novel for you. We remember it as Crusoe. What's his name? Friday. In Kerala, the point isn't to create an individualized, atomized. It's to create a society. And for that you need public action. It's a fundamental thing. The very last thing I want to talk about is that because of these really very interesting and impressive moves made by the government of Kerala, similar to what happened in China, in extraordinary action by the government in China, extraordinary. I mean, you won't know it if you read the Western press, because Western press is doing a classic psychological process of transference. You don't want to blame Boris Johnson, you blame the Chinese government. You don't want to blame Donald Trump, blame the Chinese. It's transference. You have failed, but you're blaming them for your failure. It's extraordinary. I mean, people around the world are laughing at these press accounts that are coming about this, because after all, the Chinese are bringing plane loads of goods to Iran, to India, all over the world, delivering goods as much as possible to help sort out this crisis. But this last point I want to make is they were able to break the chain. People have died. This is a terribly lethal and dangerous virus, very dangerous. Let's not minimize it. People have died. Health workers have died. It's not going to be easy. There is a worry of a second wave of infections. It's not that because it's come near zero, it's over. Health workers are certainly up there in our imagination now, but I'll guarantee you one thing, friends. In 6 months' time, when this virus is gone and a health worker tries to unionize in most parts of the world, they will be smashed. If you're not there defending the health workers, the teachers and others, you've lost your moral compass. This is not, these are not essential services only in a time of crisis. We have to teach these wretched cultures, this wretched capitalist culture, that it's not enough to call somebody essential when you need them and to throw them away when you don't need them. That's the moral failure of capitalism. Make sure they remember that. Thanks.
Vijay, that was absolutely class. Thanks for that. You mentioned there was a 3-part series. Was that was on China and its response? Is that in Tricontinental?
No, that's I can put it in the chat for you if you'd like. It's at a website called peoplesdispatch.org. And I've written it with 2 of my colleagues, one from Shanghai, one from Beijing. One is a lawyer, one is a linguist. We have been looking at this very carefully, and it's a totally factual set of articles. It's not the hallucinations of most of the press. So I can put that in the chat if you'd like.
That would be awesome. Thanks so much. We've got time for a really brief question as well. So as quickly as it's possible to answer a question like this, what are the main things that socialists in the UK and other Western capitalist countries need to consider when thinking about developing new forms of food production and distribution to ensure that it's not built on the exploitation of countries in the global South?
Well, firstly, I'm very happy to hear what Louise was talking about, this national food service. But, that's a distribution system. That's not a production system. I would say that you in the World Transformed need to articulate a 30-year project, a serious socialist project for your society. You can't create socialism immediately in a crisis. You need a long project. You need to create public action. When I visited the World Transformed the previous year, I was so happy to see people with so much enthusiasm. That enthusiasm has to be institutionalized. You cannot allow enthusiasm to be privatized again. You come back home, you look at photos from the event, you feel nostalgia, you look forward to next year. That's a privatization of enthusiasm. You need to institutionalize it. In every locality, that is, enthusiasm must become public action. If every locality in the UK doesn't create the platforms for public action, in 30 years, you'll be having the same discussion now. The 1968 generation failed to institutionalize the enthusiasm. They allowed the enthusiasm, the experience to become nostalgia. Don't allow that to happen to you. You are the generation of the 2015 student movement. Don't allow that movement to become a feature of nostalgia. It has to be institutionalized to create a public culture in Britain that's a socialist culture, and in 30 years will have completely transformed the entire country.
Amazing, Vijay. Thanks so much as well. If you can stick around and maybe answer some questions in the chat as well, that'd be really appreciated. Privatization of enthusiasm is a quality phrase. We need a national enthusiasm service as well as a national food service. So yeah, thanks so much for that. This crisis is truly showing that an injury to one is an injury to all on every level. And so we'll need lots of solidarity and exchange between the global South and North as this crisis develops. Just before we come to our final speaker, we'd like to share something with you. In the general election, Momentum launched mycampaignmap.com, a digital tool that let you know which constituencies needed you most. I'm sure lots of us in this chat here used it many, many times. Now Momentum have repurposed the map for the fight against coronavirus. So head to volunteercoronavirus.com, that's volunteercoronavirus.com, tap in your postcode and you'll be able to find and join Facebook and WhatsApp groups with people supporting each other in your area. Again, trying to institutionalize some of this care and enthusiasm. Hopefully we can post that link in the chat as well. There've also been a live streams feature added to the site, so you can see all the live streams we and others are running over the next few weeks. And we'll be updating this over the coming days and weeks. So yeah, go and check it out now if you want. So that's volunteercoronavirus.com. And without further ado, we come to our final speaker, Labour MP for Sheffield Hallam, Olivia Blake. Olivia is going to tell us about the Labour Party's proposal for a creation of this National Food Service. So yeah, we're all really excited to hear about this. Are you there, Olivia? We're just going to have to hear from VJ for another 10 minutes. He says no. Olivia, are you there?
Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Great,
Okay.
amazing. Thanks so much.
Great.
Yeah, okay, yeah, quality. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and it's been really great to listen to all the speakers so far on this really important issue. I am a relatively new Member of Parliament for Sheffield Hallam. I'm the only new Labour MP for Yorkshire, which is pretty tragic, to be honest, but it's been a really interesting time to become an MP because we've had this major global pandemic hit us, and it's also been quite interesting to see what the impact that has had on our local services, and also on the charities and work by mutual aid groups that has started to happen as well. So I'm really pleased to be supporting the National Food Service campaign that's going on nationally, and the work that they're doing through my work as an MP. So please, can you take a look at our EDM and who signed it, and see if your Member of Parliament signed it, and if they haven't, ask them to sign it, and get more signatures on that, because I think it's really important. And what it basically asks for is more support for the groups that are already on the ground as a basis for the National Food Service. So we've seen the great work that's happening across the board to make sure that people are getting food, but we're also hearing about, those, nearly 300 million people who are going without food as a result of this crisis, and as a result of inequalities that are so deep rooted. I am really passionate about food. I worked in the industry alongside being a student for many, many years. And I'm also a scientist by background, so that gives you a bit of a flavour of my kind of background. And I am really passionate about making sure that the working environments of people in the industry are strong and good. But I also think there's some really interesting history in Sheffield in particular, and I'm really pleased that the National Food Service kind of started here, because I think it's really important that we learn from the history that's happened in Sheffield as well. So we've heard Louise talk about the kitchens that were closed because of them being a hotbed of communism, but also through Sheffield's kind of industrial history, we've really seen where food really matters. So whether it's in South Yorkshire during the miners' strike, and actually the miners' welfare becoming a centre point for kind of a community-based form of getting people access to food, or whether it's the cooperatives that not only the Rochdale Pioneers over the other way, but in Yorkshire we had quite a lot of 1970s cooperatives spring up in that second wave, and they are still present today within our infrastructure in Sheffield. So I think it's really important that actually we recognise that we do still have quite a lot of cooperative food production in the UK. A lot of our dairy production is still cooperative, and there is a huge amount of cooperative work going on within food production. However, it's not strong, it's not well supported, and ultimately, without national support, this doesn't hang together very well. So I think whilst we're seeing these pockets of really excellent work going on, community-led or worker-led, it's absolutely fantastic. But what we need now is support from the state to be able to make this have longevity past this current crisis. And also maintain that social aspect, because I think it's absolutely key that we have the places for people to come together. And I think that's definitely something that the national campaign are calling for, is to make sure that we can still maintain those community focus points that we have, and they're the things that have been really attacked by the last 10 years of austerity. it doesn't take much time for me to think about places across the UK where I know community halls have closed, places with kitchens have closed, and there's not really that much left on the ground other than charities in the form of food banks mainly, or in terms of this newer kind of national food service that we're seeing coming up as well. And mutual aid obviously is really key to that as well. So I think there's two kind of sides to it, and it's about cooperation as much as anything, but it's also about universalism. And I think that's something as the Labour Party that we need to start continuing to discuss. And there was a really good report before the general election on universal basic services, and it did discuss the rights and making food a right within that. And I think that it's really important that we can continue to have these conversations and make sure that after this crisis we're still going in the right direction, but actually what's happening on the ground has the answers already to the issues that we've got, and we can learn from that. And it has to be bottom up. It can't be some top down organisation, because it will disrupt the good work that's already going on. And we know that the frustration of people who've been trying to access food through the more private and traditional ways, some might argue, and finding that they aren't able to get the supplies they need, at a time when our key workers are absolutely saving us, really, as in terms of going out every day, and actually they're getting put at risk in their workplaces as well. Whether you're a nurse or whether you're stacking shelves at the supermarket, you're still being put at risk at the moment, because social distancing or physical distancing, as which I like that, has really started to break down. But it's really difficult to maintain, and it just shows the fragility of the current structure of the private kind of supermarkets. And actually I think that the government need to step up and need to step in and make sure that people are getting access to food, because it's not just about inequality of income, it's also about we've seen a huge number of people unable to get access to food because of their disabilities, because of their age, not being able to get the online delivery slots as well. So it's not just about income, it also is about disability and age as well. So I think there's lots of different issues going on, which are to the advantage of the Labour movement, really, because I think from this we can build and we can work collectively to make sure that food continues to meet people's needs. And I think that that's a really key thing for us to take forward out of this.
Amazing, Olivia. Thanks so much. Just really quickly, time for a question. What role could Labour members and Momentum members have in kind of scaling up this project?
Yeah, really, really key point. I think that absolutely get on that map and see where you can help. I should have mentioned that I did a Labour List article, which kind of also pointed to the work of Acorn as well, which is really important. And I think it's really important that, if you've got an Acorn group, if you've got a national food service in your area, get involved. It's all community led. It's really important that people support where they can. Obviously, if you're in trouble as well, make sure that you're reaching out and into these kind of networks as well and getting the support you need. I think that's just as important at this point. And I think we've all got to kind of look after each other through this crisis and make sure that we can working as best we can to support people in our communities. I think it's also vital that if you can give money, like Louise was saying, a lot of these things are literally running day to day at the moment, and even big charities are really, really being hit hard with the lack of funds that are coming down. So we've been pushing hard on that as well, and have had some success in getting some funds, but really we need much more coming through to people. So if you can give your time, that's great. If you need support, get it, and if you can give a little, please do as well.
Great, thank you, Olivia, that's great. I think that's all we've got time for this evening, but thank you for joining us, and thanks for all that you're doing at the moment. Like you say, a weird time to start as an MP. So before we finish tonight's call, we wanted to take a moment to remember that the coronavirus is not just affecting us here, but it's also affecting and changing the lives of millions of others across the world. And there are people everywhere raising similar demands and forcing governments and employers to put people before profit. We're very grateful that we were joined tonight by speakers from outside the UK, and future calls will continue to look at this crisis from an internationalist lens.
And so we're nearly at the end of the call now, but just a few more things. Firstly, we wanted to remind everyone to look after yourselves. It sounds really obvious, but obviously that's really, really important. And to, like Vijay said before, think about physical distancing, social solidarity. Obviously, the prospect of being in our homes all the time can be really frightening for many people, and we need to act as a community to show solidarity and to look after each other. TWT and Momentum are going to be trying to organise as many online spaces for people to interact as possible. TWT have created a step-by-step guide for supporting people to run political education and organising meetings online. And I think we're going to post this link in the chat right now because it's a bit of a mess of a URL. But yeah, please keep an eye out for reading groups and any other kinds of political education, organising meetings, and of course, tune into this call at the same time next week. Finally, just to say again, if you're able to please join TWT Supporters Network, we'd really, really appreciate it. Political education on the left is more important than ever right now, and the crisis poses a real risk to small organisations like us. So yeah, please go to theworldtransformed.org/support. That's theworldtransformed.org/support. I think that'll be in the chat as well, or find the link, yeah, like I say, in the chat. Yes, we're almost done.
Keep your eyes peeled for announcements in the coming days about what the future calls are going to be. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. And thanks so much to the organisers of the call for making it happen, particularly Kyla, Mikhail, Rachel and Dan.
And one quick thing as well, for unfortunately, we can't save the chat. So if you want to find any of the links or whatever, you can go and do that now, or go and do whatever you need to do. But we will also be posting all of those links in the Facebook stream. So go and check that out if you'd like those links. Cheers.